Hi,
Hi,
this is Tea with Sushmita. Here we talk with tea. Cheers.
cheers.
Today I'm talking to someone who wears many hats. He is the chairman of Amalgamated Plantations, formerly the Tata Tea, which is the second largest tea company in India. He's a very keen social entrepreneur. He has also been an advisor to the Chief Minister of Assam, and he's the chairman and director of Rajasthan Royals, the IPL team. Welcome to the Tea Talk, Mr. Balthakur. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sushmita, for making the time for us. You know, tea is such a neglected subject. Nobody makes the time for tea anymore. So thank you.
Yes, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I'm sure that people will enjoy the talk. Get me straight to the question. Uh, you are into tea for last four generation, right? So, as a fourth generation tea person, if I call you a tea person, fourth generation, how do you see the Indian tea industry has fared so far, and what in what direction do you think it should move ahead in future?
Meaning it is, meaning that answer could be 4 generations long, but I'll try and keep it short. I think my association with tea, I can't remember all the 4 generations, has been starting with my great grandfather, who used to be the head clerk of one of the largest and most consolidated tea companies called the Brahmaputra Tea Company. And then my grandfather, he didn't join tea directly. Indirectly, he was in charge of, through his legal profession, a pleader of around a group of estates, around 9 or 10 uh, companies, which were Sterling companies, as they call them. And then my father joined the Sterling company in Assam, and he was the first Indian actually in a company called the Dikhari Tea Company. And then for me it was absolutely accidental. I lived in overseas, and then I came back to India, and I one day got a call from the chairman of Tata Tea then, Mr. Krishna Kumar, and then he talked about land value optimization. That how can we optimize land? We have so much land so that the people there, that people who live on the land can benefit. And really, we talked about a whole schematic of how do we diversify tea so that the commodity cycle is busted. And then as we worked on it from my consulting company, he felt that maybe I should join as a director. And then as chance happened, it asked me to become a chairman of the company. So I think that's really the linkage with tea. But I think after I joined tea, I think my own emotional bondage, I not only rationalized, but I suddenly felt that being from the Brahmaputra Valley, and I rationalized that there were 3 generations before me working directly or indirectly for tea. So why wouldn't I sort of try and understand what the requirements are? So where do we take it from here? Tea is wonderful. It's a fantastic subject. It's 2500 BC. It's really sexy because I'm saying it's meant for good health. Tea is a very affordable drink, and it is affordable by all classes. It's not sort of distinguished by unaffordability. Meaning there are different types of tea, and different types of tea, just like any commodity like rice or dal. And I'm talking about basic commodities which all human beings like or all human beings partake in. Find that actually tea is something which has a universality about it, where everybody can actually participate in tea. So the tea houses of China, the tea houses of Japan, actually which started the concept of tea, actually was very romantic. And the whole idea of actually socializing around tea was absolutely fantastic. Then you see this whole thing of camellia and how the Chinese did it started getting challenged, not because others started growing it, but because the market which they actually created in the UK was challenged because of the opium wars at that point in time. So the British then found out that they needed to have tea. So that's when the spread and conquest of the world started with tea, at least of tea growing. And there was Captain Bruce, and his brother, both from the Botanical Society. They had come up actually to Assam, and they were sent up to Assam. They'd come up to Assam to actually look for what is called Camellia sinensis. In this case, it was Camellia sinensis assamica.
Assamica, yes.
Yeah, Assamica, and they found it in the Singpho tribe, in meaning which were then undivided Assam, but towards the upper reaches of Nampong, towards the upper reaches of Dibrugarh and Tinsukia and that place, around there. So those people, when they sort of started finding out more about tea, and they sent the samples back to Calcutta, they found, wow, this is it. So that became the counter, just to cut it production, that just to cut it short, they became the counter to the entire tea exports or imports from China. And that's when, in 1835, the first shipment, 1835 to 37, that date is often misused or quoted doubly, started going to be exported to the UK. And actually, tea became an export product. It was an export product all through. And therefore, it came under the Ministry of Commerce. And the Ministry of Commerce, because of foreign exchange, etc., was the right department for it. Anyway, since then, since 1835 to now, it's almost 200 years. It's about 15 years short of 200 years since that first tea was made. I think a lot has changed. At that point, to make tea also, you got a group of people who were from a diversified community from Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar. That lot of people were brought here because there were very few laborers of the local variety. And I mean local variety mean of people who are either Assamese-speaking people or the local tribes that occupied Assam before even the caste Hindus, if I may call them, were imported by the Ahom kings. So the whole idea basically, therefore, was to see that a lot of people got employed. I don't think there was any bad trick in the mind of planters, but they took large tracts of land and they got workers, and they felt that they were giving employment, housing, and security, which I think was the beginning of the tea industry. And then that industry actually opened up and carried on, and then it moved to North Bengal. In fact, Assamica is even found in Darjeeling. Those were the first lots of tea, Darjeeling, and then it went to South India, then it went to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, then it went to Africa. I think bits and pieces from China and India also went to Indonesia, and later on, in later years, Malaysia and Indonesia.
Yeah.
Therefore, the growth of this Camellia sinensis and tea from China was absolutely phenomenal. Of course, there is tea in Turkey, there are teas in Iran, there are teas in Russia. So it's not as if that it was only a domain here as we feel. But tea drinking was never a subject of Assam. Tea drinking was never a subject of India.
Yeah, that it came much later, yes.
In 1916, they got as rations in the army, and those people who were recruited in India, that was one way of doing it. And the workers got tea as part of their compensation. So I think the tea drinking started at a much later date, almost forced because of employment. So that's the way the whole thing started unfurling. Now, this whole industry was regulated to the extent land was given to people who wanted to take land and buy land and develop land along with creating employment, and therefore various laws and regulations started coming. One of the most powerful regulations was the Plantation Labour Act, which actually got modified in 1951 or 52, and thereafter that Plantation Labour Act has had a very big shadow in terms of power over the industry, of the regulated tea industry. So that's really the quick structure of what happened. It became Commerce Ministry, it became regulated by the PLA, and therefore everything happened that way. But in all industry types, the competitive forces take over. So while the tea garden were producing tea was not abundant, so there was always a cycle every 3 to 5 years. The cycle went up and down, which meant prices went up and down. Your losses and profits were very much linked to that. So it was quite interesting to see that till the late 80s and early 90s, when there was a guy called Mr. Bora, Someshwar Bora, if I remember. He said, but why can't we grow tea ourselves? And they started growing tea not as a local venture, which there were already local regulated tea ventures. So they grew tea and actually started supplying this commodity to the garden which had factories, and they made tea. So that enhanced the whole sort of spectrum. That tea today of tea supplies of the green leaf that comes in and the regulated tea industry is roughly about 600 to 650 million. Roughly 52% of that tea is from the small grower. So industry forces and supply forces made them change it. So to make a ready-made cup of tea based on a kilo of tea based on small growers roughly costs you anywhere between 90 and 130. Roughly everybody talks about 150 Missouri. But if you look at it, the tea that the regulated tea industry makes, there are two types, orthodox and CTC. The orthodox and CTC range again from 150 rupees in terms of making and delivery, right up to 250 rupees. In fact, the price recovery depends on the quality and the grade. There are 4 or 5 grades which they actually manage. And 250, I'm talking about great orthodox teas or great ones with great tips or great golden tips, etc., etc. So I think this regulated industry is really making teas which are much more expensive. And if you take out the labor and the energy component, it would probably still compare with the small growers. So the small growers who make 52% now of the tea industry have brought the end price of tea actually down. So if the Assam industry is roughly Assam, North Bengal, and maybe Darjeeling, 10,000 crores in value. Assam maybe 8,000 crores. I think that value of 50% or more in terms of volume is being brought down, and therefore the consumer price share of the small growers tea is actually more slated around 115, and the consumer price of the regulated tea industry is more slated around 180. So that's a big difference. So all the big buyers actually are people who are vying to buy the small tea growers tea because by and large their quality is okay, and they're getting better if they're not okay. Their productivity is much higher in the land. They get about 3,000 kilos a hectare compared to roughly 1,700 from the regulated. So that's another impediment to price. So I think it's really challenging, but it's not as industrial as I'm making it, because finally tea is a romanced way to make tea, which finally got mechanized. It's romantic to have tea with anybody, including yourself. So I think it's very important to understand the romance of tea should not disappear from actually the making of tea.
Great.
Even
Yeah,
though,
sure.
even though I don't believe it will, and even if regulated tea industry is under this great pressure, I think the unregulated or the small tea growers, because some elements are regulated, will flourish. The regulated tea industry, if it doesn't work, I feel very sad, and my heart and emotion goes out to the workers, because the workers have actually given a lifetime, and they've got what I call trapped in the assurance of house, assurance of rations, assurance of good living, versus actually leaving somewhere and venturing out for not having a job or having a job which is another job in another industry. So I think this is where they're stuck. So I think with the democratization of information on the cell phone, I think their children and their children will start looking elsewhere for bluer skies and better futures. So I think really there's a social dimension to tea which needs to be addressed, because while the small tea growers have created the greatest entrepreneurial revolution, I think, in India, and I think it is deserving of a management case study, whether it be on Indian management or Harvard, because they've created entrepreneurs from nowhere, without government help, without government loans, without government incentives. So they've created more than 150,000 workers who make 52% of the Assam teas at least, So it is quite a revolution. So now we need to revolutionize the regulated tea industry. What do we do with it is a matter up for debate. I have very strong views on something, and I actually have it based on a social and economic model.
Yes, actually, that kind of leads me to the next question. You have this view of making the smallest tea worker in a factory to be more empowered in the way they are employed in the tea estate. So, in a decision making in a tea industry is typically a tripartite activity. It involves the government, the tea garden, and the worker. So if you have to fulfill that vision of making the smallest tea workers in any given garden, what kind of policy change, or more importantly, what kind of mindset change do you think is required in tea industry? I know that Amalgamated Plantation works with more than 1,000 small farmers, and also in Munnar, it is kind of a cooperative structure. But what kind of mindset change or policy change that do you think is required?
You see, that's a very front-loaded question. It's a very difficult question to answer in a short while. Yet I know, meaning for you and for people who are going to view us later, it is actually something that they don't want to get bored with, because it requires a lot of academic discussion as to what are the options.
Yeah, so
However,
just maybe 2-3 pointers on this.
I will give you 2-3 pointers, but it will be unfair to just give you 2-3 pointers without a framework. So let me give you the framework. See, the framework of the regulated tea industry is not based only on three people. The most important is the consumer. If there is no consumer, people like you and me, people like you and me, if you don't have tea, then who will tea sell to? So I think the fourth person, there's a government which does regulation. There's somebody who is an investor who does the investments and actually does it. There are the workers who invest and also actually are part of the entire ecosystem. But the consumer is the most important, because if the Unilever, if the Tata Global Beverages, if the Balbakris, if the smaller organizations, right, who buy tea selling in Damas, if they don't buy, you finish. So a lot of it is dependent on demand, supply, and pricing. So I think that's a very important part to put in any of the discussion. So I've always said in these discussions that while government calls people, they call people who are only the people who are manufacturing it, or they call the workers. But the workers and management and investors sit on two opposite sides of the table. They never sit alongside. So Tata's and Amalgamated had a move. And what we really did was we gave 20% roughly of our shares to the workers. But that has not worked very successfully so far, because the tea industry 5 years ago went into a depression. What does that mean? That means our cost of manufacture was higher than the cost of recovery. As a result, there was a gap, and as a result, we make a loss. Now, that loss is for many reasons. One was productivity, as I alluded to. The other is the fact that we're not getting enough from the consumer. And that consumer forces have been upset by the apple cart of 52% being from smaller growers, who I do not say make bad quality, who I say make quality at a more affordable price. And therefore, we are challenged by making the same tea and not having a differentiation to get a bigger price. So I think that's really where it is. To change all this, of course, a mindset change is required. The mindset is being changed by what I call the democratization of thought, because every worker and his child has a mobile phone. That mobile phone has got information. That mobile phone has movies. That mobile phone has news. That mobile phone is already affecting that change. The mindset change is to have a different lifestyle. I'm not saying better. After Corona, you don't say the lifestyle in cities normally better, because people who are not in cities are in a much better format and much better way than people in cities. But they dream to have a bigger house, bigger education, better healthcare. So they dream for universality of everything that is in urban areas and which people dream of, as is depicted by communications or advertising and things like that. So I think the mindset change or the mindset want is already there. So I think that if you park that for a while. Now we're coming to the investor. As an investor, if I've had a tea garden and I've paid for it, my thing is that I want something within this framework, because that's my comfort zone. But actually what is required is to make sure that we become the same as the small growers and make every single worker a small grower. And actually there should be a division between making the teas and actually growing the teas. So if you grow the teas and actually pluck it and give it to a manufacturer, as is done in China, as is done in Africa, you will find that they will suddenly become owners, and they will have their own houses, and they will have their own structure of housing, education, and healthcare. I think all of this can be done jointly, and it may take a 10-15 year period by which it happens. And I just believe that it's not an easy change, because this is a social change with people. There are unions, there are investors. Investors will say, why should I give my land away? Who will pay me back? Government will say, we don't have the money. So it's a complicated discussion. But if you had to, in one way, just describe what the utopian tea estate, the regulated one, will look like, it will look like that where every worker will be owners of the tea estate. They'll be owners of the infrastructure, and they'll create their new panchayats, and they will own their house and get all government schemes for housing and rural and agriculture delivery. That itself will take down the price a little bit, and that will make suddenly in one swoop everybody an entrepreneur. So they will start competing with the people who are their neighbors. The question is, the entire debate will be that what about their security? What happens if tea goes down? What happens if it goes up? Who will pay them for the tea estate? Meaning, will they get the current tea if they're getting roughly, meaning 300 to 400 rupees in total per day, and they get about 9 to 12,000 rupees. In fact, sometimes 15 in the season plucking when they pluck more. Is that, will they be able to get the same kind of livelihood through this entrepreneurship model? So the issue is around all those issues. Who will buy? What will the government dismantle in terms of rules and make it better? Yes, it is attractive to have your own house, but will they be able to earn enough to manage their own house? Will they be able to appeal to the government and get all their schemes so that there is no poverty? So there's no poverty, and they actually have a livelihood which may be better, not dictated by money, so that they have access to the best healthcare, best education, and option to choose a life. So the universal income, if it is managed that way, and the universal home style is managed that way, then I think that we have a model up for debate, if not for actual action.
Yeah, so it's a fine battle among a lot of things. Hopefully, things will move that way. As you said, it will take about 10-15 years if the industry people really take stock of that and start working on that.
Correct.
Right. Okay. I when I know that you are a social entrepreneur, and when you are talking about talking just a while back, you have been using this word social quite a few times. So also, when I talked to you previously, you mentioned about biodiversity. You also mentioned something called cultural human diversity. So are they kind of related? If they are, how they are connected? I have never heard the word called cultural human diversity. So I kind of really liked and would like to know more about what is the connection between the two.
That again is a full new subject. It could be a whole series with you, which I'm happy to do. But I can tell you this much. What is culture? Culture is a whole plethora of communication with people, whole way how you eat, the whole way how you live, and the whole way how you clothe, and the whole way how you write. Your entire feelings actually come out in processes like that. My situation is that if you look at it, the Northeast is actually a potpourri of, it's an amalgam. And if you really look at the tea garden, there's a cultural diversity which there is short of none. There are people from Andhra, there are people from Orissa, there are people from Chhattisgarh, there are people from Jharkhand, there are people from Bihar, there are people from Bengal, and there are people, local Assamese people. So there's 7 communities already who have different thoughts, different cultures, who have different languages. That is one. Assam itself has about 20 different tribes. A little bit, they may have all been from the Tibeto-Burman kind of origin, but really meaning from the Tibetan Mekong Valley kind of civilization, which moved on to Burma and came away. Assam itself has 20 different delivery items, meaning where I have an investment in tourism in Assam near Tezpur, there are 7 communities there. Let me just tell you, Nishi community, the Boro community, the Mishing community, the Bengalis, the Adivasis, the caste Hindu Assamese, the Muslim Assamese, and then you have another 2 different communities which I can't recall immediately, who actually are thriving. So a combination of these 20 and these different people that have come from Bihar and Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand and Orissa, I think you could not have more diverse sort of situation than that. If the
Almost like Indian Army, they have like people from all over the country.
Almost like the United States of Assam, USA.
Yeah, United States of Assam. Yes.
So that's really what it would be. So I think in that, it is so interesting that actually in terms of biodiversity, the Eastern Himalayas and the sub-Indian Himalayan region, including the river, I think are probably one of the most diverse, biodiverse cultural reasons. And the reason is because there is snow line to sea line. If you take away the politics of it, actually there is from Bhutan to Bangladesh, what we call. But actually that is the snow line to sea line, right up to Bangladesh and to Myanmar. From the whole cultural diversity is such, therefore different temperature, different soil construct, different geological features, different anthropological features, which we talked about. I think you have a very, very powerful situation to say that the most biodiverse region in India or in Asia is probably this area in terms of the population area regime, in terms of biodiversity species that exist. So I think it's very important to understand that biodiversity in terms of the rock structure, in terms of snow line to sea line, in terms of the people structure, which is anthropology, and in terms of the kind of plants, animals, food, fruits, bees, butterflies, you cannot get it better and richer than that.
Lot of tea estates are also like they call themselves biodiversified tea estates because they take care of a lot of these things that you were mentioning. Are this is there one in Assam that you could talk about? Like I know a couple of them in Darjeeling. I'm not very sure about the ones in Assam.
I think everybody has realized one thing, that monocultures are not good. So what the British did when they came, and rightly at that time, it was about industrialization. That was the model. That was how do we make it productive. This was a ready-made market. So there was market, government, and investor. They actually bought the tea. There was unemployment in places. They brought the workers. They took it and sold it. So this was done by breaking and bringing down the entire forest regime. The entire forest and biodiversity of the forest was reduced to what was called just the tea plant, Camellia sinensis, along with shade trees with
Yeah,
individual.
this I've heard this. Yes.
So basically, it became a monoculture. What everybody is saying now, they're quite happy with that. We are an eco-friendly. We are basically organic. We are basically wanting to make tea very meaning friendly with nature, and we are biodiverse. I'm sure there are tea estates like that. I haven't seen one in my travel, right from Darjeeling to other places, but many people have made good attempts at growing more agroforestry. The balance of agroforestry will bring back some of the life of which was there before 1835, which was the forestry along with tea. And that in a mixture will be good. And that's why the small tea growers have high productivity, and probably if they don't follow the monoculture route and bring about a balance, I think that they will be able to convert tea gardens into agroforestry and have much more delivery. For example, betel nut, for example, coconut, for example, pepper, for example, palm, for example, a whole lot of trees from Dalchini to what do you call to what is called this long elaichi, whatever is possible to actually do there is possible. And therefore, small tea growers have that already. So they have multiple cropping by default. So now, from a monoculture, you'll move to agroforestry and a biodiverse delivery system, which will be very, very impactful and interesting in terms of the tea culture. There are attempts to make it. We in one of our estate, Hatikuli, tried to convert it into.
I tried the tea. Yes.
We have tried to convert it into wholly organic. I think we failed. We failed primarily because of three reasons. We didn't know how to convert it. I think it was lack of knowledge for us. It was not a lack of knowledge for the tea industry, but there was nobody who knew how to collect an estate which was over 100 years old, non-organic, back into organic. That's a very tough discussion and a tough decision and a tough action plan to follow, because the earth itself had to change, the roots had to change, the water within that had to change. There was a whole 100 years way of cultivation and then go to organic. As a result, if we were producing 1600 to 1800 kilos, that was the garden's model was based on that, and the profitability was based. It dropped to 600, 400, 500 kilos per output. So we never got any encouragement to make sure it was that. And the front end price didn't go up as much. So if the front end price we got 100, 200, 250, our front end price to break even at that level of 600 was over 800 or 900 rupees a kilo. So therefore, there was always a challenge. So I can tell you from experience that actually it was not a great decision, primarily because of lack of knowledge. I don't even know if it's ever possible to convert a inorganic garden fully into organic. I don't even know. But there may be people who are wiser, and I'll be happy to be advised and to learn on that. So that's how
All
that
right.
is.
Yeah, get that. Okay. So let me now get back to asking what tea you are drinking now. I could see that you are drinking. If you could tell a little bit about the tea or something which is your favorite tea that you cannot live without.
The tea that I love most is from Golaghat. There's a
Okay.
garden called Borja. And how I like that tea, my grandfather had a staff member called Nilo. And Nilo was from Borja. So he used to, I don't know, steal or bring or part of his ration, bring this tea. And we were not allowed to drink tea when we were young. And
Oh,
then we started stealing this tea, and Nilo used to give us tea with my grandmother. And somehow that smell remained. It had that distinctive smell of an apple cider when it was without milk. And that smell remained in my mind. And if you go into a tea garden factory, you get that smell of
yes.
cider
Yes.
almost. I'm calling it cider for lack of any other sort of name for that kind of smell. And basically, I call it tea with a cider company, but even if I go to an apple plant and all that, I call it, it smells like tea. So I think I basically was very enthused and thrilled by Borja. Many years later, meaning not that I had any special tea, I married my wife Radhika, whose father was also in tea. So they've lived 40, 45 years in tea. So she had a special distinctive taste and I got used to it. I have 2 cups of tea anymore by habit. I can do without tea. And then later on, when I became involved with Amalgamated, I was so thrilled to have Borjan tea that my mother was actually even thrilled because she liked it. So today, at least, I try and get it. But as we speak with this COVID-19, I think we have no tea. We are thinking of buying uh, Tetley's tea or buying a Red Label
Oh.
tea. So we are now
So you do
looking
not have any tea at home.
tea,
Tea leaves,
and because
loose.
we have tea, but we are meaning for the last 40 days or 50 days we are on lockdown. So we didn't know, and we live in Bombay, so I think it was difficult. But my favorite tea is from the Golaghat district. I like it because it's punchy. I like the orange pico tea, and I love the pungency, and I love that cider-like smell when you don't put what do you call any milk in
The
it.
astringency of the tea that comes from
Yes,
orange people. Yes.
correct.
Yes.
I
Yeah,
love it.
great. You were mentioning about a recipe book you had. So would you like to share one of the recipes, perhaps one very
We,
unique
we,
recipe?
we have a recipe book and it covers the following. I must read it out because I have it all written. This was authored by a lady called Shubhra Banerjee. So I must give her
Okay.
full credit. And we're wanting to publish it soon. It calls How Do You Use Tea Leaves for Food? It's tea. How do you serve tea hot and cold? How do you use non-alcoholic beverages and tea? How do you make tea meals with vegetarian and non-vegetarian? How do you make tea-based desserts? How do you make diet recipes out of tea? How do you do tea for healthy life? And how do you do alcohol and tea? So this is the plethora that is going into this book. And I'll
So
send you this list, I'll send you this list.
yes, please do that. Yeah.
But what is really Shubhra actually created that. And one of the favorite drinks which we
Mm.
created jointly was what I call the margarita tea recipe. It's very heady and very nice because if you
That
take the
already sounds very tempting. Okay.
if you take the green leaf and crush it, you get that
Uh-huh.
apple cidery feeling anywhere, right? So
Mm.
this is take 2 parts of tequila, you take 2 parts of 1 part of Cointreau, you take one
Mm.
part of black tea, 1 shot of black tea, condensed liquor, you take half a shot of lime, you take crackled ice, and then you sprinkle it with dalchini, and you sprinkle it with a little bit of clove, and then you shake it vigorously, and then you pour it
In a
into
margarita shaker. Yeah.
a margarita shaker, and then you put a salt ring around the glass.
Yeah.
Then you take 2 in a bud, and then you stick it on the side instead of a lemon, and then you finish it. That's it. So I think that's one
Great.
of But I can say we
Yes.
can have a whole evening of various cocktails around tea.
Cocktails.
Tea,
Yeah.
tea, tea is to celebrate, tea is to enjoy. In China, when you go, they have the pure tea, which they actually break and they keep having it for hours, as it keeps brewing.
The
So
poor
this is
tea. Yes.
pure
Yes.
tea.
Great. I think already this tea margarita is becoming my favorite. I have to try once lockdowns are over. I get my
Yeah,
hand on some tequila.
definitely.
All right.
Tell me how it is. But it'd be nice if we had it together.
Wonderful. Great. Now, something little more interesting, tea and cricket. These are two Indian obsessions, and you are associated with both, right? I was reading today that I was reading somewhere in the newspaper that Sunil Gavaskar has made a recommendation that T20 World Cup, which was supposed to be held, this year in Australia, be moved from Australia to India because they are not allowing any non-Australian to visit Australia this year. So if that happens, if India is ready to hold something like that, it happens sometimes in September, October. What would happen to IPL? Will IPL happen? Uh,
See, there are two things. Firstly, I think the most important thing happening in India today and the world is this virus. I think everybody's mind should be focused on the virus while actually talking about the possibilities of IPL and cricket. So I think my first focus and energy would be to actually think of when this entire sort of disease, if I may call it, gets at least wound down so that we
yeah,
have some kind of control and some kind of understanding. There are people threatened and there are people dying. So to me, to actually talk about and fanciful ideas of just cricket, meaning right now it won't be. Having said that, I would like to talk about cricket, and I'll tell you why. Because cricket is good health. The healthier the people, the lesser the chances of the virus. And therefore, good health must be promoted alongside with any kind of challenges that we have. I think if there was cricket right now and everybody's TV was on to cricket, it's not just a celebration. Cricket is also about good health and good bodies and good food and everything else around it. So I don't think people should be upset. But that is an individual choice and that's a government choice and that's the BCCI choice. Will IPL happen? It will definitely happen. It will happen any time from August right through to next year June. So there may be two IPLs actually. I don't know why people are talking about one IPL. So I'm quite surprised. There may be two IPLs so that you buy one and get one free almost. The reality is that all the IPL that we play, we must actually decide to give a certain percentage, or if not a greater percentage, of the funds for any of the victims that have been challenged by this, along with where government has not been able to do it, like the refugees, like the people who are not gone home, etc. But the government has done a fantastic job so far. Given that nobody in the world knows what there is, the government is doing a job in almost every element that they are actually putting their hands on. Meaning somebody can always say, can you do it better? Maybe. But they, at being at the helm of affairs, are doing the best of what they can. Every government and every state government is doing well, including the central government with variations. So I think the IPL could and should be held only when we have a decision on the entire conflict that is going on. I have no idea how the coronavirus situation, without actually knowing the end of it or without knowing it's gone down, how you can have
yes.
the emotional support for that or the governmental support or BCCI support will not be seen as doing good, even though it is doing good because it's for good health. So I think somewhere down the
Yeah.
line, that is that issue. But tea, I think tea is a beverage which must be promoted in India. And tea should be actually promoted because it's a healthy drink. So tea and cricket, tea and cold cricket, tea and warm cricket, tea and hot cricket, all of it actually goes. So I think it's a question of how you manage this whole situation. And I think, meaning it would be great if tea were made even more compulsory within these games to actually drink. You don't need to drink only aerated drinks. Of course, aerated drinks are part of fashion and fun and also healthy. I'm not suggesting they're not. I believe that tea would be a fantastic go with it, along with water
Mm.
and any other delivery. So
Yeah.
I think tea and cricket in the house, tea and cricket in the evening, tea and cricket in the field, tea and cricket are just made for each other.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic idea. I think I look forward to seeing Indian tea sponsoring IPL someday. That would
I
be
hope
great.
so. I really hope so. I really hope so. It's
Yeah.
been
Okay. So this is the last segment. I'm calling it the 5 questions for you. So these are very
rapid fire.
three.
Rapid fire. Doing
It's
rapid
not rapid fire, but it's like very small answers. You give one word answer or one line answer. So ready?
Yeah. Rapid fire.
All right. Number one, no, these are very easy. Number one, if not tea, then what?
Coffee.
Coffee. Okay. Next question. Cricket in India is
Religion.
religion. Yeah. Nature or human?
Human is nature.
Human is nature. Okay. Great. Uh, one advice to Indians to stay positive at this time.
Indians are by nature very positive. Their entire religion has a good balance of good gods and not so good gods. So I think the whole thing is that it's balanced very well. And our best religion for India is to look out into nature and see how beautiful it is at the time of this entire coronavirus. There are blue skies, there are more birds, there are greener trees. I think people should just enjoy nature, breathe
Mm.
nature, and actually just look at the beauty that we have in India.
Great. Wonderful. One mantra in life that you live by.
One,
Mantra in life that you live by.
I didn't get the question, sorry.
One mantra in life mantra that you follow. One.
One life mantra.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it is not, there are many mantras I follow, but one is, I think, humility and compassion.
Yeah. I could guess that. Okay. Wonderful. Great. So that kind of brings us to the end of the talk. Thank you once again for your time. I'm sure that the Indian tea industry will take inspiration from your vision. The cricket lovers in India will sleep tonight a little better, and the tea lovers out there will have something to cheer with the tea tequila, right? So, pleasure talking to you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been such a interesting exercise, but I'm really humbled by your knowledge and by your spirit of positivity. Thank you.
Thank you
Keep
so much.
well.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.